Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. We are getting a surprise vlog today. I am going to show you my recent trip. By recent, I mean like a month ago trip to Boone, North Carolina, which is like the mountainy area of North Carolina, where I did lots of other things outside of Boone, including went to some rich people's houses, drove in the mountains a lot, lots of good stuff. I was there with Stephanie Canada and Serena. I will link both their channels down below. I was not, as usual, good at filming when I was with my friends, so there's very little footage of them and a lot more footage of my days that I spent by myself, just because I tend to be really present when I get to see my friends, who I almost never get to see since we live very far apart. Just FYI, you are not going to see a lot of like vintage friend fun in this video, but I still promise it will be tons of fun. So this bonus kind of video will obviously come out today, and then there will be a haul video on Friday, kind of more of my usual content that appeals to more people, showing you all the stuff I picked up at the antiquing and thrifting we did in this video. I guess spoiler alert for one of the activities. We are going to jump in with my first day. I took a red eye and I got in and drove all the way to Asheville to go to the Biltmore estate. So we're going to jump into the footage of when I arrived at the estate. I got in, as I said, at 6:30 a.m. and I began my drive out to the Biltmore, and here I am on Biltmore property. This is what you're seeing as I'm driving. This took 3.5 hours, I think, to get to, and I did pull over. I realized I was feeling pretty tired while driving, and please, please, please don't push yourself when you're feeling tired while driving, so I pulled off and took a nap in a parking lot, and then I felt very, very good about completing the rest of my journey out to the Biltmore. As you can see, this is a huge piece of land. We're just driving to get up to the house. There's nothing in sight. I am pretty bummed because the weather is pretty disgusting with the rain. This was not my ideal weather. It was originally supposed to be sunny. I was really excited, and I mean, I'm still excited, but the weather just definitely put a little bit of a damper on things for me. After parking, I took a little walk through the woods. It was really not very much of a walk. It was probably like 2 minutes tops before getting to the view of the like grand drive of the house. This is pretty wild that this is a house. It looks like it's giant. It looks like it should be a hotel or some other like structure for a lot of people to dwell in and not like a family home. I have never seen anything like this, and I've toured a lot of rich people's historical homes in America, so this was definitely a really interesting first. I started by perusing kind of the side garden. This has like a bunch of statues and ponds, and this is where I begun kind of my extensive walk through the cultivated gardens. I didn't really venture into like the wooded areas because the weather was so dismal. If it had been a nicer day, I think I would have spent a lot more time walking through the woods. I am excited to see that wisteria is in full bloom here. If you know me, you know how much I love wisteria, and look at how gorgeous that is. The ponds did have koi in them, and these kois are clearly fed by humans because kind of wherever I walked around the pond, the koi who saw me would kind of swarm and follow, which is always a little bit fun. I start going down into another part of the garden. As you can see, this is a ginormous wisteria vine, I guess. I don't think they're trees, but it was pretty astounding how large this one is. I don't know if I've ever seen one this big that is like intentionally within like a structure. I've definitely seen wisteria vines this big growing on trees and things where it wasn't planned, but I've never seen one like planned to be man-made in this manner, and I thought this was absolutely a stunning area. I then started my wandering back in the direction of the house. Saw some blooming things, but overall it's just kind of pretty astounding again every time I caught that glimpse of the size of the house through these gardens, because these gardens were also really massive, and so to have something so towering over such a massive garden was just really interesting. Because yeah, again, the fact that this is like a single family home, gardens and things is just pretty astounding to me. But it's almost time for my tour, so I'm headed back in the direction of the house. I stopped first to admire a view off the back, but again, there was a lot blocked off for a wedding. And then after going through security, I was in kind of the main house complex where, as you can see, there's the house here, but there are also some shops and some food. So I stopped here and I got a pretty terrible salad before jumping in line to wait to get into the house tour. All right, now we are going into the house. Bear with me on these kind of weird, janky photo zooms. You can't take any video in the house, so I'm having to work just with photographs. So the Biltmore was built by George Washington Vanderbilt II, who is the grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who is the originator of like the creation of the Vanderbilt fortune. They began building in 1889 and it took 6 years, and so they completed in 1895. What I will say is I found the narrative of this house tour pretty lackluster and blah. It wasn't really very interesting. I think it could be a lot more well done, but one of the things that bothered me the most about this tour is I feel like they just kept kind of emphasizing what good rich people these rich people were, how this house wasn't built with slavery, which, like, yes, it was built after slavery ended, so if it was built with slavery, that would be even more concerning than usual. But also, I just felt like they were just like a big emphasis of like, George was such a good man and his wife was such a good woman and blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to real quick root us in how they actually achieved having this money. While it is not George himself that did all the things that were done for them to have this amount of wealth, it was his grandfather and his father. He still is like enjoying the fruits of unethical business practices, and just like the complete lack of critique of the family in this place I found just kind of like jolting, especially with the discourse happening in America, and it just made this feel like such a dated tour. And I do understand that the descendants of Vanderbilts still own the estate and there's a line that you have to toe, but this just felt so historically apathetic. I didn't quite enjoy that. So let's root a little bit in history. So again, George Vanderbilt II was the grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt, again, the founder of the Vanderbilt fortune. So Cornelius Vanderbilt was a very, very, very business savvy man. I will give him like credit. He clearly was incredibly smart and understood how to work a system, right? I'm not gonna say that he wasn't a smart man. However, I would argue he was not a very good man. I actually read The First Tycoon, which is considered one of the most complete biographies of Cornelius Vanderbilt, for this video because I just wanted to make sure what I was talking about was rooted in fact. You can pick up the book and read it yourself. I would still say this book is still pretty charitable to the Vanderbilt family. It definitely talks about Cornelius in a more positive light than I guess I think of people who are that ultra wealthy while the poor suffer. So I don't know that I feel like it was balanced, but it did help me get an idea of the corruption used to build this fortune that this estate was built off of. So Cornelius Vanderbilt first started in steam shipping. However, I'm not going to spend much time here because steamships is not where he built his fortune. It's where he built enough money to then build his fortune as a railroad baron. Later in his life, it's either his 50s or 60s, he enters the railroad game, I guess you could say, because again, he was an incredibly smart and busy business savvy man, and I think he understood that steamships were eventually not going to be the way to make money. Basically, he, through both him and like a huge series of other men who were involved, they used a bunch of backhanded tactics to create a monopoly over the railroads in New York. So some of these backhanded tactics were things like an unethical stock maneuvering. From the book, it wasn't clear to me whether the stock maneuvering they were doing was illegal. I can tell you it would be 100% illegal today, but I think they were maybe pioneers in this space of unethical stock trading and using it to make yourself richer through corruption. So that was one of the big ways that they expanded the railroads and got that monopoly. And other things that they did was they bribed officials, tons and tons of government officials. And then the other thing they would do is they would price fix. They would connect with other railroad companies and fix prices, so that way it wasn't actually like competitive and it wasn't actually free business, if that makes sense. So all of those are different unethical things. One of the reasons I actually went to read the book is because Vanderbilt is known for union busting tactics, and I wanted to get some detail on what that meant, but the book covered nothing about the union busting tactics. But know that Vanderbilt was incredibly anti-union, just basically anti-worker rights. They relied on exploiting people to build this railroad and run this railroad empire. And I want to emphasize that the reason they have the money that they have is because they exploited people. They may not have been slave owners. However, they still definitely treated people pretty poorly who worked for their company. The other thing that is pretty horrifying that Vanderbilt did is during the different railroad wars, or what they call them, that they were battled in, where they would go after other railroad lines to try to, again, get that monopoly, hold all that power. They actually stopped the flow of goods into New York City, which meant people weren't getting food. And that's pretty horrifying. And I think overall, the legacy that the Vanderbilts leave is a legacy that set us up for the utility monopolies we have today that make it really hard to live. They set the precedence for a lot of these very, very questionable stock practices that make the wealthy really rich and don't give any money back to the worker actually making the fortune, as well as just the creation of these megacorps. Before this era, the mega corporations are not as common as they are today. So that's just something to think about as you're seeing the richness of this home, is while George Vanderbilt II himself may not have played a role in these tactics, ultimately his fortune is based off of bad ethics. And I just feel like the house was so much like, these are the good rich people. Their workers were so happy, which we'll go into the workers in a second. It left kind of a bad taste in my mouth, since we are arguably in a second Gilded Age, and the Vanderbilts made their fortune in the Gilded Age. There was just something about the way they talked about the Vanderbilts and like how good of people they were that just, I don't know, it didn't feel real. And like, I feel like a lot of times they'll be like, oh, these rich people wanted to leave this, and this in their legacy to like state parks, and that's one of the reasons they're such good people. But it's like, if they were such good people, why didn't they sacrifice that land while they were still alive to the parks? Why was it upon their death that it goes to the parks, right? I don't know. There's just all sorts of things about rich people that you cannot be this wealthy in capitalism ethically. Capitalism should reward people who are innovators and idea makers. However, I don't think by innovation we mean like stock shenanigans. I think we should mean things that actually better the lives of people or improve efficiency in things, not rigging things for investors, right? If you were to ask me what I would boil down the legacy of the Vanderbilt family, it would be mega corporations and stock market shenanigans that set the tone for everything wrong with America today financially. To be fair, I don't think Vanderbilt was actually the worst of the kind of like core four rich families at the time. I actually think the Carnegies were much more terrible and unethical in their business practices, but that's kind of like choosing who was the worst rich person in that time is also like choosing who was the worst dictator in Europe. It's like you can kind of choose, but like at the end of the day, it's all bad. While I also think if Vanderbilt didn't exist, all these unethical practices still would have arisen. He still helped normalize them and make them a thing. Not a fan of the Vanderbilts and not a fan of this audio tour. I don't know. It hit really false. So I would love for somebody to like make a tour that you could listen to in the house that's like rogue and like actually talks about Vanderbilt's place in the American economy and how it's impacted the life of the average American worker day to day today. But anyway, that is enough kind of about my like rich people are bad rant. We are now going to head into the underworkings of the house, which is what I found most interesting. Like, you just saw a bunch of pictures of different pretty rooms that serve different functions. But now I think I want to talk about what's to me so fascinating about this house, which is the whole network sitting at the very bottom of the house. So first, when they take you down into it, you're entering through like a corridor that I think is pretty servant oriented, I guess. But then you head back into, there's just a small space in this downstairs area that was still for use by the family and by the wealthy people. And that is, there are a ton of changing rooms for the pool that was down there. There's the pool itself, which is a fascinating structure in and of itself. The way it slopes down, I guess during the time there, like you'll see the ropes on the side. And I guess it's because people couldn't actually swim. They just kind of like held ropes and like moved around that way. And I thought that was really interesting because like I look at it and I'm like, wow, that looks like a fantastic swimming pool to like jump and splash around in. And apparently that's not what they were doing. And then there's also a bowling alley down here as well as a workout room. So I thought all of those were really, really fascinating. So also underneath the house was where all the servants kept the house running. From what I recall, it sounded like there was anywhere from 50 to 60 people helping this house run. So there's some really large pantries, there's multiple kitchens. This is where they do their washing, the whole shebang, canning, all this food processing. This was incredibly interesting. Most like big rich people houses tours I've been on, they keep their office quarters in the old servants' quarters, so you don't ever actually get to see what it looked like. So seeing all the pantries and things here was really, really cool. The one thing to note that is, I guess, nice of the Vanderbilts is all of their servants had their own rooms. Typically in this time frame, servants would share rooms, but each servant had their own room. But here you're seeing a couple different rooms. These rooms are nice. I will give them that. Like, they definitely didn't have their servants in terrible quarters. They do like keep saying over and over in the tour that Edith Vanderbilt, who was George Vanderbilt's wife, was a firm but kind mistress, and I don't buy it. As somebody who works for a company that wins a ton of best workplaces awards, I call BS. This is actually where the servants would cook and eat their food. This here is the main kitchen where they would prepare the food for the Vanderbilts. As you can see, it's a pretty big kitchen. They were ready to cook up a lot of different foods on a whim. Facilities here are really quite impressive, and I guess it makes sense for a manor as big. This is the kitchen though, where the servants would actually get to eat their meals. They would rotate in shifts to do so, and again, yes, I would have killed to hear the gossip, although maybe back then they were very careful about where they gossiped and wait till they were Sunday off grounds to gossip about the Vanderbilts. But yeah, there's no way, I don't know, anytime I hear like somebody is a strict but kind boss, I think of the bosses that I've had that were strict, and I would not put kind in there. I don't know if strict and kind exists. And again, I just felt like there was so much emphasis on like they were good employers, because they did pay above what most employers paid, and they did have nicer quarters than most employers did in this time. I don't buy that their servants were really, really, really treated that well as people when they were doing the job. Just from, again, my own experiences and my friends' experiences doing things like dog sitting, nannying, and stuff like that for wealthy people. Wealthy people don't treat their help kindly. That like part of the family line is usually BS. And I'm not saying there's not exceptions. Given what I know about the Vanderbilts and from the 900-page book I read, I don't buy it. There were also rooms where they did lots of flower setting. I thought that was really interesting. I'll talk about this when we go through the greenhouse, but they had some really interesting tricks here. And then I also adored, they had us go through the laundry room. They had so many really interesting old devices on doing laundry in there. There were so many different sinks, and then of course like they had so many ways to press things. And my favorite was they had essentially a washing machine hooked up to a belt that I don't totally understand functionally how it worked, but it was cool to see. Like I said, I really would like to come back here and do the whole servants quarters tour that is even more extensive than this tour. I was most excited and found the tour down here way more interesting than the tour in the upstairs quarter of the house. I am so glad they at least had a part of the tour in the servants' quarters. But with that, I end my tour of the house, and we are going to head into the gardens. So for all my critique of the Vanderbilts, I will at least say, thank God George spent his money on interesting things. The house was incredibly interesting and full of interesting art. And then these gardens are also incredibly interesting. I don't know if you saw, there was a glimpse. Someone was doing their quinceañera pictures here. I saw a lot of quinceañera people out and about on this trip. I don't know if there's like a specific season for quinceañeras, but I feel like it was the season. The way these are planted is really interesting. I know a lot of them is true to the way George wanted things. So I will give him some props. I have definitely dog sat for some really, really boring, uncreative rich people that had millions of dollars to build a house and built essentially a square with windows in it. So he at least had imagination. I wish I was here maybe just a month later, but I did enjoy the early spring things here. There were irises up, really, really early parts of lupine blooming, which lupine is one of my favorites, so I was super happy to see a ton of that in the garden. Early snapdragons, pansies. They did truly have a phenomenal planting of irises. Getting irises to sit this dense like that is not necessarily the easiest, and I'm just truly a sucker for lupine. And then of course there was the wisteria everywhere. It was interesting because the rhododendrons on the grounds were clearly like almost completely done. So I'm now coming up on the greenhouse. or I think they maybe called it a conservatory. I don't quite know the difference, but I would call it a greenhouse. I don't know what the cycles of bloom are like in this greenhouse, but I feel like I came at a pretty good time. I felt like there were a lot of really interesting things in bloom. And this greenhouse was extensive. Again, I will give him props for doing interesting things with his money. Lots of like great carnivorous plants, orchids, lots of just like fun tropical things in here. And this is like definitely a state-of-the-art greenhouse. I've been to a lot of greenhouses in different places, and this is on par with what you'll see in like the National Greenhouse in DC. I don't know what that's actually called. It might be called a conservatory. Like, look at these orchids. This orchid collection is pretty phenomenal. Again, it's going to be something you see in government level buildings and things like that. So it was very, very, very impressive plant-wise. Like, look at these frilly orchids. Just, again, phenomenal varieties and clearly very well taken care of to this day. I like have mixed feelings of the fact the Vanderbilt family has continued to fund this, because it could be in disrepair if they didn't. However, I do think it leads to more censored history, as I like previously stated. This was just incredible, and I love a garden in a greenhouse, so I did feel very appreciative, and I also felt appreciative of not being in the rain for this part. I think that's why the greenhouse was so crowded, is because it was a way to enjoy nature while not being outside getting dumped on. So I found these side rooms of the greenhouse really interesting, because while I was in the main house, I was like, how are there so many hydrangeas in bloom and other beautiful potted flowers? And look, here they are all in the greenhouse. So it seems like they maybe cycle them, or I don't quite know how that works. But when I was in here, I got quite excited because I felt like I understood how they had so much fresh flowers in the house. And that sounds like a silly thing to be excited about, making that connection, but it did truly delight me. So I did think the cactus collection was a little bit lacking, but to be fair, I grew up in an area with a lot of good cactus collections, and I have spent a lot of time in places where cactuses just grow a lot more naturally. So it is okay that their cactus collection was not the most impressive. Also, I don't feel like rich people are that into cacti, but I could be wrong. While this is still really cool, not that impressed, I do think the National Conservancy has a much better cactus collection, even if the orchid collection is comparable. I thought this was particularly beautiful because of like the skillful use of no color in this gardening in here. Pulling this off is actually rather challenging, and the only color in here was these little kumquat trees, which I thought was pretty incredible. And by only color, I mean only color that isn't like white and green and normal planty colors. I thought the inside of this was pretty darn impressive. And the other thing that I think is really cool that the estate does is they have musicians hired to play music in different parts. Today, they didn't have anyone in the conservatory, which would have been playing in here. They had somebody actually in the house playing harp, and it was really, really quite beautiful. And I know I'm very, very, very heavy in my criticism, so I do want to acknowledge what I think is really cool, and I think paying musicians to play live is really, really great. I think keeping up the grounds as well as they do is pretty fantastic, as well as the house. And again, like, George was, I guess, not responsible for amassing his fortune. I just want to be clear where his fortune came from, right? For a rich person, I actually think he did a pretty good job managing his fortune and doing something really interesting. I do want to note, it was $100 to go here, which is incredibly expensive. This is the most expensive house tour I've been on. So I do wish that they might figure out a way to make this a little bit more accessible, especially considering they claim they want to contribute to the public good, but the public cannot afford a casual $100 house tour. As I have been here, against my hopes, the weather has actually gotten progressively worse, and I try to be pretty good spirited and like not let things like weather get to me, but I was actually pretty upset by the weather here. I feel like really idealized my day walking through these beautiful gardens in the nice weather and like really enjoying myself, and I felt just kind of heartbroken that it was raining. And it's not a rational feeling, but it is a feeling I had, and I want to acknowledge that normally I'm pretty cool about the weather not being ideal, but today for some reason it really got to me in the way it dampened my plans, because I had planned to spend a lot more time in the gardens than I did, and I had also planned to walk a lot of the woods and foresty parts of this estate, and I just felt like the rain stopped me from being able to do that, because like the other element of this, which is so vain and shallow and ridiculous, is I had done my hair because I knew I was going to be with Stephanie and Serena, and I wanted to take cute photos. So it would have been different if I wasn't trying to keep my hair wrapped and like in good shape. It kind of is really like silly and shallow, but I got so frustrated with this weather. And towards the end, when I was filming this, I was just getting really, really sick of the rain and really sick of it continuing to get worse and worse and worse. I just was feeling in a mood at this point, and I was also hungry because all I ate was a salad because it was so expensive and the salad was so sad and so terrible. I was feeling actually upset at this point, which just really truly tells you how hungry I was, because I don't think if I wasn't on the edge of hunger I would have felt as upset as I did at this point. It was like the combo of the weather, my hair, and then also how much I spent to go here. I just felt like I got less out of it because of the rain, and it was so much money. It was not the ideal like tour trip or whatever I planned for myself, and usually I'm pretty good about going with the flow on things, but I was not good about going with the flow, and I want to acknowledge that. And I want to acknowledge that sometimes when you travel you get irrationally upset, and that's okay. Don't live in that like being really upset part. By the time I got back to my car, I was in a pretty foul mood, not appreciating things, I guess is what I would say. This is the part where I cried in the car a little bit because I felt so frustrated, and again I just think I was way too hungry, and I was hungry and it was taking so long to get out of the estate because there's like a one-way flow of traffic, and it took me I think 25 minutes to get out of the estate. That's like normal, it's just because it's so massive. And so like I just remember sitting in the car crying and thinking and saying no one should be so rich that it takes 25 minutes to drive off their estate. Looking back, I think it is truly hysterical, but I was truly so upset in that moment. Enjoy this dreary footage of me driving off the estate. I can laugh about it now, but like in this moment, I was like livid. I like don't know when the last time I've gotten as worked up when traveling as I did in this moment. But once I got off of the estate and ate some food, I was feeling a lot more optimistic, which is good because I had a 2-hour drive before I got to the hotel to meet Stephanie and Serena. After driving another 2 hours, I finally made it to the place I'm staying, which is the Blue Ridge Tourist Court. As you can see right here with that lovely sign, this is the original stone office. So this is a motel that was built in 1950. Over the years, it slowly fell into disrepair and was eventually condemned until the current owners, Brian and Mira, decided to buy it and restore it. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, which is pretty neat. And you guys, the details they put into these units are incredible. I was so impressed by this motel. When Serena was like, we're going to come out here, we're going to stay in this motel, I was kind of skeptical because motels, but this is a stunning motel and absolutely an amazing experience. I would 10 out of 10 recommend. And just look how cute and beautiful this is with all the pastel doors, and each room is themed very closely with the door in color, and it's just a really, really, really special experience. This is the room I'm staying in, 102. So here it is. I have just put my suitcase up, but as you can see, I have the king suite. It comes with a kitchen with a burner, little kitchenette. This is actually a great place if you're going to stay a little bit longer. And she even has some Pyrex and little tea tins and things like that. This is cute. You can see local art, and the custom built like yellow closets are really, really cool. I was very impressed by this because I know how much work it is to do a built-in like this, and it was absolutely stunning. That's my coat in it already. This was really, really cool, and this is what I'm looking for when I talk about wanting to stay in a boutique hotel. I had that weird bad experience in the boutique hotel in New York, and I think it's just it wasn't an actual boutique hotel. This is a boutique hotel, and this was absolutely gorgeous and also so clean. This sink I loved, and the mirror like turned out like that, which I thought was super neat. I didn't use it because I knew I would not remember that was there. Really, really, really well done. They did an awesome job with these renovations. I definitely highly recommend, if you're going to stay in this area, staying in this motel here. Also, the owners are just lovely people. We spent a lot of time with Mira, and she is wonderful. So you're also giving your money, instead of to a big company, to a small business of really good people. The next place, we began our morning by going to this crepe place. It was really quite good. The coffee was really good too. I got some really unique coffee blends, which I love. And yeah, I just thought this was a really, really cute shop. Definitely check them out. And it looked like they were selling local art, I think. And there was a lot of interesting stuff here. From here, we went antique shopping. I adored this cherry uranium glass set. I am not usually a huge uranium glass, but this one was incredibly cool. And then there's like plenty of carnival ware, other glassware, just a lot of super cute stuff. I was trying to be pretty good here since it was the first of many antique shops I was going to go to on this trip. And you can kind of see Serena and Stephanie running around in the background. I am incredibly bad at filming when I'm with friends. You don't see much footage of them. They're there this whole time. So when I get with people who I don't get to see that often, I want to enjoy my time with them, and so I'm not very good about actively filming. Upstairs, I found this adorable unicorn tea set, I suspect from the 70s because of like the brown and the shapes in it. It was so cute. I wanted to film it, but I definitely didn't need it. This is kind of like a look down on the layout of this floor. As you can see, there's a lot of booths in this antique mall, and a lot of them were pretty fun. And here's a really unique handmade ceramic piece that I carried around for quite a while. I loved the like go for it pond and all the little paintings and stuff on it. I thought this was so cute, but ultimately it doesn't make sense for me. It's not the right shape for what I need. So I decided to leave it behind and practiced some really good self-control. I was also good and I resisted getting these cat dishes here, which are again super cute, but I make cat dishes all the time. Spooky has enough cat dishes, so even though these are adorable, I practiced restraint. They're kind of hard to see, but these are some 1930s dollhouse furniture. I just think it's so cool that we've just been making miniatures for so long and people have been obsessed with miniatures for so long, and I think that's just so fun. We're getting lunch at a place that I forgot to film. We went thrifting and we found this set.
This is not a licensed Disney product, can guarantee.
Unhinged.
But
they were fun nonetheless. I also liked this painting next to it. There were a lot of paintings I liked out here, but I loved that it was specifically Snow White who flushes the toilet. This was just incredibly funny. So if you want to read them, you're gonna have to pause. I'm not gonna read them all, but this was a hilarious little set. Next up, we went to another antique mall, shocker. This one had a beautiful Pyrex display when you came in. This is like one of those where you absolutely adore how they set up their booth and like want a booth just like it, but in your house. At least that's always how I feel. So many great Pyrex. I don't collect Pyrex. These are not a temptation for me, but they were still super fun to look at. If I was home, I absolutely would have bought this yardstick. It says Gaze True Value. Help is just around the corner. And I think it is absolutely hilarious. They had one in orange and one in yellow. I have learned from experience that you can't put a yardstick in a suitcase. So at least my suitcase. So it stayed at the antique mall. Here's another view of that Pyrex just a little bit further out, and I also wanted to show just how kind of aesthetic and fun this store is. I just thought, honestly, like the way things are displayed, it was just super cute. So far, my biggest beef with Boone is how quickly and early everything closes, which is not shocking for a town this size. We did find something open. We went to this wine and chocolate bar. That was super cute. I actually remembered to film all of us, even though I did it too fast. It was ridiculous, but very cute, very fun. Earlier this morning, I said goodbye to both Stephanie and Serena, and I love spending time with my internet friends, and it just kind of makes me feel like I just always feel kind of heavy and sad when we have to say goodbye because I don't know the next time I'll get to see them in real life. It's always like the sad part of these trips, of any of the trips I've taken recently, is saying goodbye to my friends. I wish I could just collect them all and take over a town and have everybody I love in one place. But that's not how that works. So instead, I just really, really enjoy the time I'm with them. And then now that I'm back out on my own for the next 2 days, this first day I'm going to focus on doing some Blue Ridge. I guess it's technically a parkway, not a highway. Don't know the difference, but I'm going to do some driving on that. That's obviously what you're seeing now. And our first stop is going to the Moses Cone Manor. So I'm just going to drive my little kind of sad heart over there. So this is the Moses Cone Manor. I wanted to stop here because they have like an artisan craft shop here. I was also hoping maybe I would be lucky and they would have house tours. They have the upstairs, I think, restored. I don't totally know what the situation was with the upstairs, but I was hoping to get to go on a house tour. Those don't start till Memorial Day weekend, so I was way too early for this being here in April. Luckily, I still got to go inside the house and explore the downstairs, but it's really gorgeous, and it's one of those houses that was built in Gilded Age, and it has like the spider web, not stained glass, but like glasswork that I really adore. And usually this like kind of more neo-colonial style is not as much my thing, but I actually thought it was very pretty on this house. I'm going to show you the little bit I could see inside, which was kind of like the grand staircase, as well as a bunch of fireplaces, and of course the big front entry, and some of that beautiful leaded glass work that you can see from the inside. Even though I couldn't do the full house tour, I at least got some good historical goodies situation, whatever you want to call it. And of course, like every historical house, they frame these two people as being really wonderful and giving, even though they're clearly like incredibly rich, and there's no way they did that without exploiting people. But why would we talk about that? And then I did go through the arts area. They had some really, really, really good pottery artists here. So if you love pottery, it is 100% worth the stop if you're going to be kind of in this area anyway. This is on my way to another stop. I don't know that I would recommend going completely out of your way to go here unless they are doing the house tours. I got to see some really amazing pottery, and I got to talk to another artist kind of about different crafts and trades. Her name was Monica, and she is a painter, which is really cool. I always love talking to painters. I haven't painted in a very long time. And we talked a lot about the different pottery in the room, and I shared with her how some of them were made, essentially, because she'll have people ask occasionally. Really, really talented potters in here. And then I'm gonna hop in the car to continue my drive to Grandfather Mountain, but I was just enjoying, the views and the panoramics, and this was just oh so lovely. I enjoyed this walk back to my car thoroughly, which I feel like sounds so funny, but I did. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and this is just one of those days where I felt very lucky to be alive. I'm going to spew some quick facts about the Blue Ridge Parkway. It began construction for it in 1935 and finally finished in 1987, which is really interesting, and where I'm actually going to take you to the final section, which was considered the missing link, which was around Grandfather Mountain, where that's where we're actually headed, funnily enough. The main area that we're going to be driving through here is the Highlands. I technically at some point went through the Pisgah region, but now I am definitely in the Highlands and really enjoying that. This is actually the longest road planned as a single unit in the United States. It was actually designed to protect a lot of the forestry around it. So it actually helped establish this series of parks that help preserve a lot of natural wonder in this area, which is really neat. Just a couple little facts there. And then I left the Manor and I am driving over to my next stop at Grandfather Mountain. And I am enjoying, I guess, this parkway. There were some really, really interesting features here, really, really stunning views. I don't feel like I've ever been on a highway or parkway or whatever that has this kind of viaduct structure that it seems like this highway is fairly famous for. So that was really, really interesting. And honestly, it was just such a gorgeous day out. I know it looks kind of cloudy here, but it was really, really, really sunny and nice feeling. Actually, there in person, it's so funny, that this footage looks so cloudy, but it was not that cloudy. I will say this road's a little potholy, so be careful. And then also be careful of the trucks that really don't know how to drive. Some of these curves, these trucks are being ridiculous, taking them so wide, and I'm just calm down, and if you can't drive a car that big, you shouldn't have one, is my take. My opinion is most people who have trucks shouldn't have trucks. Not that I know how to drive a truck, but I don't know how to drive a truck, so I don't drive a truck. There's a reason I'm scooting along here in my little rented Toyota Corolla. And let me tell you, I think I had a much better drive than those trucks. Sorry, I don't know what it is about trucks that really gets me wound up. And to be clear, I'm talking about pickup trucks, not delivery truck. Delivery trucks is the wrong term, but trucks. Trucks that are actually useful and deliver supplies across America, as opposed to are a overcompensation for, we'll just say, a bad personality. I really got driven pretty crazy by the trucks on this road because they were so risky about how they took corners. And they didn't need to take the corners I don't think they needed to take them that wide. Again, I've never driven a truck, but just seemed a bit silly. But yeah, enough of that weird little rant. I was really sad this morning when I said goodbye to everybody, but I am enjoying this kind of alone time, just exploring by myself. I think this kind of balance of solo travel and meeting up with friends is really working for me. I kind of did this in New York as well, and I feel like it gives me the time to do the things that I want to do, that maybe I want to do quicker and not be held up by other people. Maybe other people don't want to do. Let's be honest. Not everyone's a drive around on a mountain type of person. So I feel like these trips where I maybe have a couple days with friends and then a couple days to me are really working well for me. So that's something I'll probably try to continue to do as I travel. We're going to arrive at Grandfather Mountain very, very soon, and I am incredibly curious about what the experience there is going to be like. I have finally arrived at Grandfather Mountain, which was the end goal of this jaunt. And wow, this is a really cool experience. I definitely recommend going. I will warn you, if you get car sick though, this is kind of going to be a nightmare. These are still pretty big switchbacks, but when you get up further, which you'll see, it becomes really tight. I think it would be really easy to get car sick here. I have a sister that gets car sick really easily, and I don't see her doing well here. So just so you know, but this was really, really cool. I loved the drive up this. The flora is so different here from anywhere else I think I've been. So I really enjoyed that. We are, of course, still in very early spring, so the trees are just starting to leaf up and come back. It's still a little barren and wintry looking, but there's plenty of green on the ground. For the first stop, I wanted to get up to their kind of like main center where there's some animals on exhibit in their natural habitats, as well as like a learning experience. So I'm pretty excited to check that out, especially since most of their animals are actually, rescues is the wrong term for zoo animals, but they're animals that had no chance of living in the wild because they somehow got separated from their mothers and were found and had to be basically rescued and rehabilitated in a situation like this to survive. That's always cool. We love that over like kind of the zoo situation. So I am going to caveat by this was really crowded, and because these are natural habitats, it can be hard to see the animals, which I think is a really good thing that the animals can get some sort of privacy. First up, I stopped by the bears, and they were kind of lively. All of their bears were actually born in captivity. None of these are animal rehabilitations. It's better for a bear to end up somewhere like here as opposed to in somebody's backyard who should not be keeping bears. And they were very cute. I do love bears. I kind of tried to see the cougars, but they were very hard to find. So kind of quickly stopped by the bald eagle. I've seen tons of bald eagles, so they aren't that novel to me. Sorry, bald eagles. But I always love otters. This one that you're seeing here, his name is Uno. You only see Uno because Uno is too feisty to live with the other otters. He's very cute, very curious, getting his snacks. And I always love seeing the little otters. They are so cute. These elk are the other exception to the injured animals. These were actually born on an elk farm. This one's playing in the water and he's very cute. They're both brothers and I love it. And I have like never seen an elk play in the water, so that was super novel and fun. He kind of seemed to like splashing about. That's it for animals, and I'm gonna head into the actual exhibition center. My footage here is terrible, as it always is inside an exhibition, because I'm like, I'm gonna do a good job filming this, and then I get excited to read and learn things. There was a lot of really great identification tricks in here and like herbal knowledge and things like that, so it was definitely a fun stop. Next up, we are headed to the swinging bridge, which I'm very excited and maybe a little nervous for. I'm pretty okay at heights, but they can get me a little bit. But this was very, very short switchbacks, very, very turny. Like, I don't even get car sick, and I think if I wasn't driving, I wouldn't have felt the best on these roads. The nice thing is they do have like the parking situation all figured out. There's only so much parking at the top, so they make you wait at a line at a certain point, and then you have parking attendants directing you to. I was here on a peak day because I really appreciate that they do this. I wish they did it more in the year because this was a really expensive experience at $25 per adult, and during April they do a way cheaper tickets for people who are local. I wish they did it all year round for people who are local. $25 is a pretty big barrier to entry in a natural space. Not that it like belongs to locals, but it certainly belongs to them more than it belongs to me, and I really wish they had more than just April to visit this area for that price. For getting to the bridge, we started by ascending a bunch of steps, and by we, I mean me, because I am solo here. You're climbing to the view, and wow, it's a view. These are very different mountains than what I'm used to because they're a lot like smaller, really, really beautiful, and again, their ecology is really, really different from what I'm used to, so it was really cool to see just some different types of rock and brush and stuff. That is so nerdy, but that's just the way I am. I was wearing shoes that were not super appropriate for this because I wasn't thinking about this being kind of a trek. So I stayed pretty much on the path. But I did make it to the swinging bridge. The swinging bridge was built, or at least opened, in 1952, and apparently back then it like really swung. But this one was a reconstruct that they did in 1999. Crossing the bridge was a little scary. Again, heights don't always get me, but this one got me a little, because even though they said that the new 1999 version doesn't swing, I kind of disagree. It felt swingy. It was definitely moving in the wind. So I'm sure it didn't swing as much as the 1950s, but it definitely swung. But man, was it worth the views. I mean, you can get the views without going on the bridge. You can get it kind of from the land, but I thought it was really fun to go on the bridge, and definitely a really, really, really cool experience. And it was just so pretty. And I didn't know if this would actually be fun or if it would feel like very touristy or kid oriented, but definitely as a solo adult traveler, I had a ton of fun exploring this bridge. And on the way back, this dingus in front of me thought it was fun to try to swing the bridge as much as possible. I disagree, and I think it's incredibly disrespectful, but that's just my opinion. And then after the bridge experience, I just kind of wanted to sit and enjoy the view for a bit, so I sat down and I ate a Cliff Bar snack while looking out on these beautiful mountains. And yeah, it's just really quite beautiful. I did get to witness a proposal, so that was fun. This is definitely a great spot to propose at. I feel so lucky I got to have such beautiful weather for this part of the trip, especially after my frustration at earlier weather. And then after leaving the area, the Grandfather Park, I decided I wanted to just drive a whole bunch more of the Blue Ridge Parkway because it was really, really beautiful and really interesting. And I just like really enjoyed it, which talk about like a transformation in the last... I think it was about 6 years ago. I was so anxious that I could barely drive a few blocks from my house. And so the fact that now I'm going on this long drive just to enjoy myself and see nature and feel the vibes is really quite incredible. And I just want to encourage you, if you're in one of those super locked down anxiety moments in life, that you'll get through it at some point. It's going to be really terrible. Sorry, that's not encouraging, but it was not very fun for me. However, me, someone who literally couldn't drive for like a few months in my life because it made me so anxious, is now willingly driving this road just to enjoy the scenery and like live my life. I was fully capable on this trip of driving out 5 hours to meet up with strangers on the internet, and this was a completely unimaginable thing for me not that long ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, where I was so anxious that it was hard to go to the grocery store. It was like hard for me to drive anywhere. It has taken a lot of time and a lot of therapy and medication and just relearning how to ground myself and cope and exist. It has happened for me, and it was really slow progress, but this is a big deal that I was able to do this. And I want to encourage you, if you're in kind of a hard place, it will get better. It's going to take time, but it will get better, and you'll be able to one day do the things you wish you could do. So yeah, that's, I guess, just my encouragement, because yeah, I literally like left Grandfather Mountain and I was like, oh, I kind of don't want to go straight back to the motel because it's just so beautiful here and the light's so beautiful, and I just want to drive and sing to Taylor Swift, unfortunately my problematic fave, just enjoy life. And I cannot believe that I willingly was driving for fun. That is basically would have been impossible. Even as recently as like 3 years ago, this would have been impossible for me. So trips like this always make me like reflect a lot on who I am and how I've grown. I think that's why travel is really important. You don't have to go international to travel and to grow. There are plenty of really amazing places in America to travel to. It might be in your own backyard and you don't even know it. Obviously, North Carolina is not my own backyard. Bad summary, but to sort of sum this up, I am going to go back towards my hotel, and then I am going to grab some Bojangles because I am a sucker for Bojangles. I like their biscuits, specifically their sweet biscuits, and I like their sweet tea. So I'm going to stop and pick up some of those before going back to the hotel and eating my leftover Mexican food that I ordered when I first got here. And then I'm just going to do some voiceover, get some editing done, get ready for tomorrow, in which I am going to go and stop at every antique store I have time for between here and getting back to Raleigh in time for me to catch my flight that is at 7 p.m. So that's the plan. I kicked off my morning by being in a lovely coffee shop, getting a drink and some food. This place was excellent, highly recommend. And then I hit the road to start my journey back to the airport. On my way, I, of course, hit a ton of antique shops. This was one of the first ones I stopped in, and I would say it was like the most beautifully put together. While I think there are booths, there has to be some sort of like aesthetic standards each booth is required to keep, because this antique shop was one of the most aesthetic I've ever seen in my life. There were so many beautiful things. It was set up very beautifully and less like cluttered than most antique shops. So I thought that was really interesting, and I would definitely recommend stopping in this antique shop if you normally get really, really overwhelmed by other antique shops. Despite how high-end this antique shop felt, I did not feel the prices were unreasonably high or really that much higher than any other antique store. There was this really fantastic bin of antique spools, which is something I use quite a lot in my decor, so I got pretty excited and had to make some tough choices on what I could actually bring home. And now we are at Antique Mall number 2. This one is definitely more the norm of what I'm used to for antique malls. Of course, I still enjoyed perusing this antique mall. There was still a lot of beautiful and fun things to observe. I just would say like this is more your run-of-the-mill antique mall as opposed to the other one. I was very tempted by these crochet bags, but I have a bunch of bag handles with the goal of crocheting my own bag, so I ultimately did not take any of these home with me. One of the booths here had this really amazing antique wedding dress, robe, and photo set, which I thought was really cool. It was like not my style or like not my thing and kind of expensive, but I did think it was really fun to see one of these just kind of out in the wild. I had to really talk myself out of bringing any of these vases home. They were really, really beautiful, but I was trying to be really intentional with what I was putting in my suitcase and what I felt was going to survive. So I did take none of these home, even though looking at them now, I'm a little bit regretful. This is another antique mall that I would say is kind of that more chaotic, but you're gonna really find a bargain here type of store. This is a hunt antique mall. This is not an antique mall that things are just like, it's just not as easy to find, but as a result the prices here are pretty phenomenal. This I think is my favorite antique mall of the day. I really liked that super curated antique mall. This I felt like just the way the customer service was, this was just a pretty fantastic antique mall. I don't totally know how to explain it further other than just saying the variety of vendors in here was fantastic. They had a lot of like space for aisles. They actually had carts you could bring around, which is something very strange to me because that is not something that most antique malls where I live have. Here I am taking you through a pretty intense sewing booth. At first I was looking and the prices looked insane, and then I saw everything was 70% off except for things marked firm. It's clearly like trying to get you to do that sales buy. It's interesting though because it was off an not abandoned mall, but like a mall that clearly is not as trafficked as it once was in its heyday. So you could hear like mall sounds while in this antique mall. Even though this antique mall, while it could connect to the mall, it is actually completely separate from the mall. They blocked off all those doorways. What I thought was really fun and cool here in general in North Carolina is a lot of these antique malls had like these giant signs and really, really good furniture collections, which isn't something I see in the antique malls, both inside Seattle, but I would also say outside and around Seattle. It feels like all that signs and stuff just don't make their way to the antique shops the way it seems like they do here. And here we have more kind of fun and cool signs. My favorite, I think, in this shop, which I believe it was a display piece and not for sale, is this cool cream soft serve sign. I thought it was so fun. I would have been in trouble if this was in my state because I would have wanted to take, not the Hardy Boys, I wasn't into the Hardy Boys, but I read all of these Nancy Drew books, who knows how many times through as a kid, specifically the yellow ones. I found what felt like the Coca-Cola and Bud Light room, where there was just a lot of really interesting Bud Light, Coca-Cola, and then cigarette advertisements and signs in here. And to get back to the airport on time, I only had 45 minutes to go through what claims to be the largest antique mall in the south. You're not going to see much footage here because I was just trying to see most of the booths and see what was here that I wanted, but I did spend some time perusing. This was just a pretty phenomenal Barbie booth. We have some pretty good Barbie booths in Seattle, but this one just seemed to have really good collections of like the holiday dresses. So I definitely got some inspiration for potential future projects. However, I left with no Barbies. I figure if I decide to actually go forward with these projects, I can buy these off of eBay. It was really, really fun to see be such a phenomenal display of Barbies. But that's it. I should have recorded it, but outside of this antique mall, I took my suitcases out and I repacked everything before driving to my final destination at the airport to get back home to Seattle. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I will have the haul out on Friday at my usual time, which is I believe 8 a.m. Pacific time. So stay tuned for that and subscribe and stick around. And of course, check out Stephanie and Serena if you don't already know them or follow them. They are super wonderful human beings and they also make great content. So with that, I will see you later this week. Bye!